What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the fourth and final day of my draft recap and reaction series. We've hit 75% of all the divisions so far, and on the final day, we're going to be hitting those two championship divisions, of course, referring to the AFC East and the NFC West, because that's where our two conference champions hail from. So we're going to start off by hitting the AFC East and the Super Bowl champion New England Patriots. And this was a very intriguing class to me because I feel like it wasn't great. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. Weirdly enough, the Patriots are the only team in the league that I feel like has gotten away with never really having a spectacular draft, but still being a terrifically dominant organization. And this was a typical Patriots draft. There's some picks that I like. There's some picks that I despised. But in the end, they're still going to be 12-4 and win the AFC Championship anyway. So it never really matters if we're being honest. But either way, I'm still going to be talking about these picks, starting with N'Keal Harry at 32. I wasn't a huge fan of that one. I had several receivers graded higher than him. I know Marquise Brown was already gone at this point, but I personally had a much higher grade on DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, AJ Brown. I had a higher grade on Hakeem Butler as well out of Iowa State. There were so many options for them to go for at wide receiver, which admittedly they were very weak at wide receiver coming into the draft, and they went with one that I honestly I don't see what they see with him. At this point, it just comes down to a disagreement with how we value these prospects. I never really hopped on the N'Keal Harry bandwagon. I know a lot of people were really big fans of him, had him as the number, at least in the top 3 of their receiver rankings. I never even had him in my top 5. So it just comes down to disagreement on the value of Harry. I know there's a lot of people that really more agree with the Patriots than agree with me, which is fine. We'll see who's right in 3 or 4 years. But just my initial impression was that there were several better receivers on the board, and they passed up all of them for an inferior prospect. Again, it's really just a matter of opinion. I really do like the foursome of day 2 picks that they got after Harry, though, with Juwan Williams, Chase Winovich, Damian Harrison, and Yodny Cajuste. You can even throw in Froholt there in the mid-4th round because he kind of ties into my point on Cajuste, which is the Patriots have had a lot of success with athletic mid-round offensive linemen because they have maybe the greatest offensive line coach in the history of the sport in Dante Scarnecchia. They've never really had to use high draft value or high value draft assets on linemen unless there really was like a can't miss kind of guy like Isaiah Wynn was last year. They've never really had to use high value assets on linemen because they know that Scarnecchia is going to coach them up no matter what. They've gotten so much value over the years out of unheralded prospects. You look at, Shaq Mason several years ago, who's turned into one of the best guards in the league under Scarnecchia's tutelage. And so when I look at Cajuste and Froholt, those are athletic, high upside picks who maybe aren't ready yet, but I think within a year, they're going to be really damn good pieces for that offensive line, solely because of the coaching they're going to be receiving. My belief in these picks really comes from my belief in the Patriots coaching staff, which is not an insane take to have because they have maybe the best coaching staff in the league. So in a vacuum, I feel like the valuations of these players were sound. I think they went in the right spot for what they are, but I think that they're going to exceed their draft value because of who's going to be teaching them. So I really did like those picks. The Juwan Williams and Chase Winovich picks in the 2nd and 3rd round, I felt were very typical Patriots picks, in that Juwan Williams is a huge, massive corner who's going to be more of a matchup DB in that Bill Belichick defense, where he's going to be solely, specifically assigned to be taking away these big X receivers on the outside. There might be games where he's taken off the field quite a bit if they're not really going up against those smaller, shiftier receivers because he doesn't do as well against them. But, if you've got a 6'4", 6'5" receiver, you're going to see Juwan Williams a lot in those games because he's one of the few corners that I feel can match up with that kind of size and match length for length, and he's a really good athlete as well. So I like that pick for them because they're one of the few defenses out there that I feel like will actually put him in a position to succeed, and they'll only match him up with receivers that he can cover. So I like that pick a lot for them. The Winovich pick, to me, Chase Winovich is literally just Brooks Reed 2.0, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Brooks Reed was a solid contributor on some very good Texans defenses early in his career. He's not the most athletic guy in terms of pure vertical explosiveness, but he's got really good short area quickness. His straight line speed is surprisingly good. I didn't think he was that fast on tape, but it sure showed up at the combine. And I think he's kind of that classic, I guess Rob Ninkovich isn't a bad way to compare him either, where, he can have his hand in the dirt or he can stand up. Not the longest guy, not the strongest guy, not the most explosive guy, but he plays his ass off. He's got a great motor. He's got great technique. And he'll never be the star, but I think he's a great contributor. And so if there was any team that a guy like Chase Winovich could fit, it's on a Patriots defense that really values contributors more than stars. In fact, I can't remember the last time the Patriots actually had a star pass rusher other than Chandler Jones, I guess. He's the only one I can think of in the last, 7 years. So it's a system that's never really relied on stars. It's relied on being in the right place at the right time, doing your job, and everybody just kind of contributing. And it's almost like defense by committee, and he's a perfect fit for that. And then about 10 picks later, also in the third round, they got Damian Harris out of Alabama. He was the other side of that trade with the Bears that I talked about earlier in the week for David Montgomery. And personally, I feel like Harris was a higher graded running back than David Montgomery. So the fact that they traded down and still got him was tremendous value. Sony Michel is a great running back, so it's not like Harris is going to be the lead back there, but Michel does have a pretty extensive injury history, and injuries tend to rear their ugly head with him at least, once or twice a season. So Harris is going to be used, just based on what we know about Michel. He's a very versatile back. He's great in protection. He can catch the ball a little bit, not necessarily as, he's not James White, obviously. He's not Kerryon Johnson or Alvin Kamara. He's not going to be like that primary put him in the slot, line him up anywhere kind of running back, but he can still catch the ball for you. He runs really hard. He's got power, not the best long speed, but in short areas, he's very explosive. If I was going to compare him to anybody, it would probably be Pierre Thomas, who I know it sounds kind of weird to compare a great receiving back like Pierre Thomas to Harris, but a lot of Thomas's best catches and runs were on screens, and I feel like Harris is a pretty good screen back, to be honest. So I think the comparison holds up there. And if you got Sony Michel at 100%, assuming he's 100%, we don't know if he will be, but if you've got a fully healthy Sony Michel and then essentially a young Pierre Thomas as your number 2, and then you got James White there as your number 3 and receiving back, that's a pretty good trio right there. I think that would be a very, very versatile, very effective running back trio that they can lean on in this offense in the absence of, true powerhouse receiving threats. If I was a Patriots fan, I'd be perfectly satisfied with that. And then later in the fourth round, after the Cajuste and Froholt picks, they got Jared Stidham, quarterback out of Auburn, who, interestingly enough, the Patriots were one of the destinations that I felt he fit the best, because he's really at his best when he's just allowed to be a pocket passer, a distributor, more of a point guard than kind of a run around and make crazy ass plays like a Pat Mahomes or a Kyler Murray. Like, he's really at his best when he's allowed to just kind of sit in that pocket and be essentially like a Tom Brady. And since he's got really good physical traits, I think you can maybe, not saying he will be, but I think you can maybe look to him as an option for post-Tom Brady life. Because Tom's not going to play forever. I mean, he's already 42. I know he says he wanted to play for another few years, but anything can happen and they have to have a plan. And there's a lot worse plans out there than training up Jared Stidham underneath Tom as his backup, with Josh McDaniels kind of training him and helping him learn the offense. And he doesn't have to start right away, obviously, because he's got the greatest quarterback of all time ahead of him. But if he's on the bench for 1 year, 2 years, and just kind of soaking up everything he can, fixing what flaws he does have, or at least working on accuracy on the move, pocket presence, feeling pressure instead of seeing pressure, all the things that young quarterbacks sometimes struggle with if they're kind of thrust into the starting lineup too early. If he's on the bench and working on all that kind of stuff, just his natural physical talent, and I think the coaching that he's going to receive in New England, you could be looking at the successor to Tom Brady here. Again, it's not a guarantee, but the talent fits and the skill set for what their offense is fits, and I can't really think of a better situation for Stidham to be in. So if I'm a Jarrett Stidham fan, I'm pretty happy that he ended up in New England because that's a really good fit for him. In the 5th and 7th round, they got Brian Cowart, Jake Bailey, and Ken Webster because Bill Belichick never met a punter he didn't like. Although, interestingly enough, it's not a left-footed punter, which he's gone on record multiple times in saying that he likes left-footed punters because the ball comes out a little bit weird and returners aren't used to it. He took a right-footed punter. Not that it's a big deal, but it is something to note. Cowart, I think, can be a pretty good rotational defensive tackle for them. I don't project him as a starter, but I think if you need somebody to come in for, 3 or 4 series a game, kind of give the starters a blow, you could do a lot worse than him. And then Webster from Ole Miss, I graded as a 6th round pick. I think he's a pretty good late 7th round flyer, so that was a good value for them. I don't know if he'll make the team, but I think he's got a shot, and if he performs well on special teams, either in camp or in preseason, if he does well, I think he's got a chance to make the roster. So overall, the Patriots class is solid. I disagree with a few of the picks, but I understand why they made them. It really just comes down to how I value some of these guys in my grades versus how they value them in their grades, and it's impossible to know really who's right on that for the next 3 years. I can give my take on it, I can give my opinion on something, but philosophically, in terms of why they made certain picks and certain rounds and all that kind of stuff, I understand why they made all the picks they made, so overall, I'm pretty good with it. Moving on now to the Dolphins, who, remember, you have to take into account that they traded for Josh Rosen with one of their picks, so really we have to include Josh Rosen as part of their draft haul in context. And when you look at Christian Wilkins, Josh Rosen with one of their picks, Michael Dieter, Andrew Van Ginkel, Isaiah Prince, Chandler Cox, and Myles Gaskin, that's a pretty damn solid class. They needed a quarterback for the future. I think they got one in Rosen. I think they got him at a tremendous value because of how the Cardinals kind of botched this whole Kyler Murray trade situation. I think if the Cardinals were actively engaged in trade talks a lot earlier, they could have got a better value for him and maybe even would have been able to get a package of picks and not just kind of a one-off day 2 pick for him. They really kind of screwed themselves once everybody knew they were taking Murray because they had no leverage. So if they moved on this Rosen deal earlier, it would have been a worse deal for Miami. But they ended up getting a really damn good deal on, in my opinion, somebody who's going to be a franchise quarterback. And he's super cheap because most of his money was in year 1 too. So that's a great deal for them. And then in the first round, before that 2nd round pick, they took Christian Wilkins from Clemson, who I actually had to them in my mock draft last week. I felt like defensive tackle, other than the obvious gorilla in the room, which was quarterback, I felt like defensive tackle was the worst position for them on the team. Like they needed defensive tackle help, and they needed it badly. And Christian Wilkins was one of the best defensive tackles in this whole class. In fact, in a normal draft class that didn't have guys like Quinnen Williams and Ed Oliver in it, he probably would have been a top 10 pick, like slam dunk top 10 pick. He reminds me a lot of Geno Atkins in a lot of ways, and not just with athleticism and power and polish and all that kind of stuff, but really more his ability to be so slippery at the line of scrimmage, where he finds ways to kind of work his shoulders, work his hips, and just slip into the backfield when it doesn't look like he should be able to, but he's such a good penetrator in that way, almost kind of just turning himself into liquid and just finding his way into the backfield. It's really uncanny how good he is at generating pressure from that 3 technique spot because he's just so slippery. So I really like that pick for them. They needed a defensive tackle, and they got one of the best ones to come out in the last probably 2 or 3 years. And then they doubled up after the Rosen trade, obviously. They doubled up in the 3rd and 5th round with 2 Wisconsin Badgers, Michael Dieter and Andrew Van Ginkel. Dieter is interesting because I don't think he's ever going to be a Pro Bowl guard, but I think he's going to play for this team for a decade because he's just so solid in every area. He's not spectacular at any one thing. He's not the most powerful guy. He's not the quickest guy. He's got good hand placement. He's got good technique, but you're never going to look at him and be like, oh, okay, that's Marshall Yanda. We're not going to generate any pressure at all. He's never going to be that kind of guard. But I think just having like a really solid presence for like 10 years in front of Josh Rosen is really going to do him wonders. Because again, he's not great at everything, but he's not bad at anything. Just very, very, just like a double off the wall, a drive right down the fairway, just incredibly solid, well-coached player. Love that pick in the 3rd round for them. And then in the 5th round, they came back and got Van Ginkel, his teammate, outside linebacker, might actually move inside for them because he's got the size to do it, at least by modern standards, he's got the size to do it. 6'3", 240, which again, today is actually on the bigger end for a linebacker. Not the longest guy. He's only got, I think it was 32 or 32 and a half inch arms. So, that's not the best length in the world for like a stack and shed Mike linebacker. But in terms of short area quickness, explosiveness from hole to hole, he's a really, really underrated linebacker prospect. So to get him in the 5th, I think was a really good value. That's exactly where I valued him, as like a high upside, maybe a Sam or a Mike kind of guy. So really good value for them there. And then in the 6th round, they got Isaiah Prince, offensive tackle out of Ohio State, who has similarly huge upside, but has also some of the worst technique I've ever seen. I think if you treat him as what he is, which is a pure developmental tackle with immense upside, I guess kind of like a Julian Davenport, if you remember him from a few years ago, who just had all the physical tools in the world. Chantrell Henderson before him, all the physical tools in the world. Ironically, they both ended up in Houston, where you're really treating him as, we're going to stash him on the bench and he's going to be a project for our offensive line coach. And if it works out, it works out. Back in the day, Jason Peters was considered a high upside project, and he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. So sometimes it works and you get Jason Peters. Sometimes it doesn't work and you get Julian Davenport. Either way, it's a late 6th round pick. Who cares? It's a flyer. So I'm a big fan of that pick. We'll see what they can do with him. And then in the 7th round, they came back and kind of upped their backfield ante a little bit with Chandler Cox from Auburn and Myles Gaskin from Washington. Cox is just a typical, we need a fullback, we need a battering ram, we need a special teams demon kind of player. Your typical 7th round pick, because you're not going to take somebody in the 7th round who you don't think can also contribute on special teams. And usually hard-nosed fullbacks from the SEC can really contribute on special teams. So I'm pretty okay with that pick, especially for a 7th rounder. The Myles Gaskin pick, I thought he was going to be gone a lot sooner than that. It's possible he slipped because he's got a lot of wear on those tires. I think he finished like 3rd all time in Pac-12 in rushing yardage, just because he got so many carries starting from his true freshman year all the way to his senior year. But he's still a really good athlete, under 4.6 in the 40, somewhere in the mid 30s for vert jump. So that explosiveness and that speed really shows up on tape. It was good to see the numbers kind of back that up. You could probably knock him for size, because I think he's like 5'9", 205, which isn't the biggest guy in the world. Christian McCaffrey was even bigger than that when he was coming out, and he's, 215 now? So he bulked up. I'm not saying Gaskin can't bulk up, but McCaffrey was also a much better athlete than Gaskin too. But for a 7th round pick who has a lot of really good tape in a major conference, yeah, I like that. I don't know if he'll make the team, because it seems like you can just get a running back from anywhere these days. But in terms of just, using a 7th round pick on a kid that you really want in your camp to compete for a backup spot and making sure that you get him and not losing him to the undrafted free agency process, you could do a lot worse than Gaskin in the 7th round. So from top to bottom, looking at this Dolphins class, when you look at them getting a probable future Pro Bowl defensive tackle, because that's what I think Christian Wilkins is, a probable, even if you don't want to go as far to say probable, a possible franchise quarterback in Josh Rosen, a really solid guard in Dieter, a really high upside linebacker prospect in Van Ginkel, an extremely high upside offensive tackle prospect in Isaiah Prince, and then you got special teams help with Chandler Cox and potentially a rotational running back with Myles Gaskin. That's a really, really solid class. They didn't have a whole lot of picks. They only had 6 after that Rosen trade, but in my opinion, they certainly made the most of them. Moving on now to the Buffalo Bills, who, as much as I like Miami's class, and I just went at length about how much I like Miami's class, if you had to make me choose any draft haul in this whole division, I would probably go with Buffalo. I feel like they killed it from start to finish, starting with that 1st round pick, Ed Oliver. I did not expect him to be there at 9th overall. I didn't think he would get past Detroit. They ended up taking TJ Hawkinson, and Oliver was just sitting there for free for Buffalo. They didn't have to trade up. They didn't have to do anything. They really needed defensive tackle help, especially after the retirement of Kyle Williams, and they needed somebody who in my opinion, could kind of carry on Kyle's legacy as just that wrecking crew in the middle of a defense, which he was for a long time for them. And to be honest, Oliver, since he's much more athletic than Kyle ever was, Oliver can be even better than Williams. And that's saying something, because Williams is going to be in the Ring of Honor in Buffalo one day. Like, guarantee it. Guarantee he's going to be remembered among the greatest Bills ever. And Oliver can be better than him. He's got a great defensive coaching staff. He's surrounded by other fast, incredibly athletic talent. You got Edmonds and Milano behind him, one of the best young linebacking duos in the league, and I will fight anyone who disagrees with me on that. They've got a really good safety duo behind him with Hyde and Poyer. They got Trey White, who's a really good young corner. I mean, other than like a stud edge rusher, this Bills defense isn't really missing anything. And Oliver is probably going to be their best pass rusher as a rookie. And that's not really an indictment on the rest of the team so much as it is just praise of Oliver. I think he's phenomenal. So I love this pick for them. It was honestly their biggest weakness on defense, and they got gifted a borderline generational prospect. Not quite as good as Quinnen, because Quinnen is a generational prospect, but in any other defensive tackle class, Oliver would be number one, like not even any doubt. So just a great value for them. I love that pick. And then they came back at the top of the second and got Cody Ford, who has a little bit of versatility in that he can play guard or tackle. I went with offensive lineman in my mock draft for Buffalo, basically under the premise of I need to make Josh Allen as comfortable as humanly possible. And so for them to get Cody Ford in the second, I feel like is a really good value for them. They needed offensive line help. Not necessarily desperately need it, because they did make some moves in free agency, but I feel like they don't have anybody on that line that can't be upgraded. So to get Ford, who has, at the very least, he can play 3 different positions, left guard, and right tackle. I don't know which one he's going to end up playing for Buffalo, but I think he can play any of them. So, you bring him into camp, you see where he fits best, you see who he beats out, and no matter what, he's going to upgrade at least one of those spots ahead of Josh Allen. So I love that value for them. Great pick. Devin Singletary in the early third. They took him in the 10th pick in the third round, running back out of Florida Atlantic. He's an electric talent. Personally, there were a couple other running backs on the board I would have preferred, whether it was Damian Harris or, hell, even the kid from Oklahoma State who the Ravens took. I'm blanking on the name, but he was like my number 3 running back. Like, they were all available at that point. The only ones who in my top 5 who were gone were Josh Jacobs and Miles Sanders. So I feel like there were 3 other backs on the board I would have taken over Singletary. I understand why they wanted a running back. I understand the need for either a running back of the future or just a rotational guy if they want to run a committee. But that was the one pick I was in a little bit of disagreement, just because I think there was better talent on the board. I won't knock them too much for it. The Dawson Knox pick, it could go either way. And Knox is an interesting evaluation. I feel like he went earlier than I thought he should have, but at the same time, tight ends were flying off the board. He was the 8th tight end taken, and it was only in the late 3rd round. So maybe they felt like they weren't going to get anybody if they didn't pull the trigger. He definitely was not one of my top 5 tight ends, and he ended up not being any of the top 5 tight ends that got taken. So I guess positional value ranking wise, I was okay with it because there weren't any better tight ends left on the board. But at the same time, in context relative to other positions, I feel like there were better players on the board. So there's 2 ways to think about it in terms of there's a run on tight ends. We don't think we're going to get one at all unless we take Knox right now, or do we stay true to the board super strictly and only take best pure player available, not best player available at a position of need? So there's 2 different philosophies to it. Philosophically, I might have passed on tight end altogether if I didn't feel like I was getting value. But again, that just comes down to matter of opinion and how to build a roster and all that kind of stuff. It's just what I would do. I understand why they took Knox there. I just feel like it was a little bit early. The Voshon Joseph pick in the 5th round, I feel like was a great value. He is an extremely athletic linebacker prospect, and he's going to be joining a linebacker core that is already extremely athletic. He's got, I would say, some technical and instinctual problems to work out, but then again, so did Tremaine Edmonds, and their coaching staff was able to get the best out of him as a rookie. So I feel like if anybody's going to be able to train a linebacker's eyes to be more disciplined, which is what Joseph needs, it's going to be the Buffalo Bills coaching staff. So I think he ended up at a really good spot just for his career development. And at the very least, he can contribute on special teams early because, again, he's a fantastic athlete. So I really like that value for him specifically. And then Jaquan Johnson, very underrated safety out of Miami. They were potentially looking for some safeties of the future that they could groom and mold behind Hyde and Poyer. Just to kind of, if they need to alleviate cap space in the future, those might be some of the first places they look. So Jaquan Johnson, I really like as like either a nickel or a dime safety at first that they kind of develop behind Hyde and Poyer. And then they got Tommy Sweeney, who I actually really liked as like a 5th round tight end. They got him in the middle of the 7th, which was fantastic value for them. So from top to bottom, Oliver, great value. Ford, great value. Singletary and Knox, a little bit early, but I understand why they did it. I wouldn't have done it, so I will knock them for that, but I understand why, so it's tough to say. Joseph, great value. Johnson, other Johnson, and Sweeney, all good value picks as well. So they did great early, they did great late, and we'll see what the middle rounds turn into. Overall, I love this Bills class. I think it was exactly what they needed, both on offense and on defense. And while maybe they aren't ready to compete for a playoff spot yet, they're certainly going to be a hard as hell team to beat. They've still got a great defense, and they've got an exciting young quarterback who, even though he's inconsistent, he can really put a team on his back at times. Just go ask the Vikings. So I'm really excited to see what the Bills do this season. I think they're a better team than they get credit for, and we'll see how many wins they get. And rounding out the AFC East here, we've got the New York Jets, who for the second year in a row got an incredible value at the 3rd overall pick. I knew there was a very strong chance that they were going to get Quinnen Williams. Just kind of reading the tea leaves of, okay, we think Kyler's going to go first and we think Bosa's going to go second. Naturally, that would leave Quinnen to the Jets. He's the best player in this class. So as far as I'm concerned, if you're getting the number 1 player at the number 3 pick, you did a pretty damn good job in the first round. I think he's going to be a franchise changer for that defense. Absolutely a franchise changer. And they've already got some franchise changers on that defense. You look at Jamal Adams, one of the best young safeties in the league, the leader of the locker room already, only being there for 2 years. I think Quinnen comes in and he gives them basically their Aaron Donald. He is an equivalent prospect to Aaron Donald in my eyes. And that's saying something because I had Aaron Donald as a top 5 pick and one of the 3 best overall players in the 2014 class. He ended up going at 13, but Quinnen is the first guy I've seen in college that reminded me of Aaron Donald, not just in terms of like quickness or technique or even just stature because he's bigger than Donald, but just pure domination on tape, the unblockable quality, the, oh my God, I'm watching a future Hall of Famer kind of quality on tape. Quinnen's the only one that I've seen since Donald that gives me that immediate impression. So to get him at number 3, you pair him with Leonard Williams, you help him out on the inside, you've got Jamal back there, you've got a tough, aggressive linebacking core now led by CJ Mosley, who they just paid a whole bunch of money to. This run defense, for starters, by the way, is going to be incredible. The pass rush is going to be hit and miss because, again, I still think they need a little bit of help at edge rush. Even with the Ja'Kai Polite pick in the 3rd round, I still think that they need a little bit of help. But everything other than that, I'm a really big fan of. And speaking of the Polite pick, they got him in the 3rd round. Some people might call that like an incredible value. That's exactly where I had Polite valued. And I'm not even talking about him potentially bombing interviews and not testing well. Like even just going off tape. He was, I don't want to say a one-trick pony, but he kind of reminded me a lot of like a Bruce Irvin, a Vic Beasley kind of guy where their one trick is really good, but as soon as a tackle kind of sits on that speed rush, I don't know that he has anything else. He doesn't really have a whole lot of length or a whole lot of power, so I don't really think he's going to be able to, come off the edge and then kind of bend it up inside into a tackle's chest and bull him straight to the quarterback. That's not really what he does. I think if you're really going to have success with him, it's going to be more in the blitz game. If he's kind of matched up one-on-one with a running back or a tight end, I think those are matchups he can win. I don't think he can beat a tackle. So, getting him in the 3rd round, I think is proper value because I don't necessarily think he was ever like a first or a high second round pick to begin with, like a lot of other people might have thought. So I'm good with the pick. Jets fans have to be aware that he's a limited player. He's only good at a certain few things. The few things he is good at, he's very good at. But I don't think you're getting like a future Pro Bowl kind of player here. He's a piece to a defense. He's not the centerpiece to a defense. The centerpiece is Quinnen Williams, and the other centerpiece is Jamal Adams. Is not Ja'Kai Polite. So as long as we set reasonable expectations here, I think he can be a solid contributor for them. The Edoga pick in the late third, also in the third round, I like that for them. They needed tackle depth, and he's got pretty high upside. He already protected Sam Darnold early in his career at USC, so I like that fit for them. The Wesco kid from West Virginia, the tight end prospect, he was, I believe, my 9th ranked tight end, and I think he was the 9th tight end taken. So I guess position value wise, that makes sense. It's the same thing with Dawson Knox, though. Just because a whole bunch of tight ends were flying off the board early, I feel like teams felt like we got to get one now or we're not going to get one. And I feel like it was a little bit early for him. Again, philosophically, I understand why they did it. It's just, if I criticize Buffalo for it, I got to criticize New York for it too. I just feel like they took him a little bit early. But that being said, I think they got Blake Cashman maybe 2 or 3 rounds later than he should have gone. I had him valued as like a late 2, early 3 kind of linebacker. I thought he was the 3rd best linebacker in this class. And I don't know how many linebackers went ahead of him, but I think it was a lot. So he's exceptionally athletic. He's not the biggest guy, but he's really tough in between the tackles. I think you can put him at either outside linebacker spot, and he can handle either coverage duties as a Sam. He can take running backs in coverage as a Will. He's fast. He's rangy. He's really fluid. Like, I loved everything about him. If I was going to say who he reminded me of, just when you kind of take stature into account, he's got a lot of Chris Borland to him, who also, again, wasn't the most highly thought of linebacker prospect, but the dude was a tackle machine, just exceptionally quick from hole to hole, great instincts. And to me, if you can get like a Chris Borland type of player midway through the 5th round, that's a really good value. I know he only played for a year in San Francisco before he retired, but that kid made an impression. I mean, he was really damn good, and I think Cashman can be just as good. So I love that pick for them. Then they took Blashawn Austin out of Rutgers in the next round. Admittedly, I didn't evaluate him. I never got a full grade on him because I just didn't have time to get to him, so I don't know what they have in him. But just kind of looking at his athletic profile, I imagine they probably brought him in to compete for like a dime spot, or at the very least maybe make the team on special teams. So that's probably what he'll end up doing. But I don't have a grade on him, so I can't really give an opinion on that pick. But their first 5 picks, Williams, Polite, Edoga, Wesco, and Cashman, I thought they nailed them. I think they did a really good job. I would probably say that Miami and the Jets are tied for my second favorite class in this division. They both didn't have a whole lot to work with, but they both did really well with what few assets they had. So hats off to them. And now moving on from the AFC East, let's go over to the NFC West, the final division in this 2019 draft recap and review. Let's start it off with the LA Rams, the other Super Bowl contender from last February. And I feel like they did a pretty good job kind of wheeling and dealing to get back some picks that they lost. They traded down out of the 31 spot because they had to get some more draft capital. They had to start replenishing the depth on this roster. And I think when you look at their day 2 picks, they got Taylor Rapp, Darrell Henderson, and David Long. All 3 of those picks I loved. Rapp, I think, went later than I expected him to. Not the best athlete at safety, but the dude never misses a tackle. He's in position on every single play. Again, if you want to match him up against a super athletic tight end or running back, that might be a bad idea, but in like a zone defense where he's allowed to kind of read the quarterback's eyes, read route patterns, and just kind of put himself in a position to make the play on the ball, I think he can do that really, really well. And again, he never misses a tackle. And really the most important job of a safety, since you're the last line of defense, is don't miss tackles. So really, really good late second round value for them that probably should have gone either half or a full round earlier in the high second. That was about where I had him graded. So I love that value for them. Darrell Henderson in the early 3rd round. Same kind of thing that I was talking about with the Bills, where I understand that they needed a running back because, maybe Todd Gurley's knee is a little bit shaky and you maybe want to lessen his workload, do a little bit more of a rotation rather than just leaning on Todd for 20, 25 touches a game. So I get the motivation behind taking a running back. I feel like there were better ones on the board. But again, like I said with Buffalo, it really just comes down to how we grade these individual players and disagreement with value and all that kind of stuff. Personally, I feel like both Damian Harris and David Montgomery were better players, but again, that's just me. I can really only knock them. Actually, it's not even really a knock. It's a gentleman's disagreement. Let's just call it that. I feel like there were better players on the board, and even though we're in agreement on the positional need, I would have taken somebody else. It's not that big of a deal, but that's just how I feel. The David Long pick, what was it, like 9 picks later? I feel like they got pretty good value for him. He's a corner out of Michigan. They really did need corner help, and I highlighted that in my mock draft when I had them taking Julian Love in the first round. Julian was actually available for this pick, and so I was kind of shocked that it wasn't Julian. If I was going to knock this pick for any reason, it's because I feel like there were 2 better corners on the board in Julian Love and Amani Oruwariye. I went over that yesterday when I was talking about the Bucs. Again, it just comes down to how I value certain players, how they value certain players. We agree on positional need. We disagree on which player to take. We're going to see who's right in 3 years. For all I know, I have both Amani and Julian dead wrong, and they are super right on David Long. We'll see. Position-wise, I agree they needed a corner because Talib and Peters both might be in their last year, so we'll see if this works out for them. The Greg Gaines pick in the 4th, I like that as a rotational defensive tackle. I think they got decent value for him. I graded him as a 5th round pick. They took him very late in the 4th round, so it's essentially a 5th round pick. Not that big of a deal. Decent value there. David Edwards, I think they got really good value late in the 5th round as maybe a backup swing tackle. I don't know if he's going to be Andrew Whitworth's replacement because Witt's probably only got 1 more year. I don't know if I would put him as like my starting left tackle, but I think you could do worse than David Edwards as a swing tackle. So for that reason alone, I think I'm okay with it. Maybe they'll come back next year and invest a high pick in a left tackle once Andrew, if he moves on. I don't know if this is his last year or not. I would assume it would be just because of his age, but I mean, the dude's still playing at a Pro Bowl level in his late 30s, so we'll see. But either way, Edwards, I think, is a solid swing tackle for them. They took a punter, Nick Scott, in the 7th round. Personally, I never paid attention to him, so I can't speak to how good of a punter he is or isn't, but hey, might as well mention it. And then Dakota Allen out of Texas Tech, they took in the late 7th round. That's a special teams pick. I don't think he's a starting caliber linebacker, but if he makes the team as a special teamer, I wouldn't be shocked. Overall, the Rams, considering they came into this draft with a severe lack of assets, using those trade down opportunities to try to build back up their pick count, replenish depth at some key positions that they really needed depth. Overall, I'm okay with their class. I would have selected a few different players here and there, but in terms of positions of need, I feel like they hit all of their needs, so I can't complain too bad. Moving on to the Seahawks, who came into this draft with even fewer picks. They only had 4 at the start of the draft and then ended up with 11. I mean, it was just deal after deal after deal. But I feel like overall, they got some pretty good value here. The LJ Collier pick, I feel that was way too early. I think a lot of people feel, or at least in agreement with me, that was way too early. I never, ever would have taken him in the 1st round. But if we're kind of doing a little bit of mental gymnastics here and we just kind of switch the Metcalf and Collier names on the draft board, it makes me feel a little bit better about it. Maybe I can't give my full blessing to this class because, again, I'm really big on getting value with those high value assets, namely 1st and 2nd round picks, and I feel like they didn't do that with Collier, but the Metcalf pick almost makes up for it. So I can't be too mad. Not to mention that the Seahawks are, I probably should have seen this coming because since when did the Seahawks ever take who they're quote unquote supposed to take in the 1st round? They always operate kind of in their own plane of existence when it comes to how they evaluate players. So they must have seen something totally different than I and most other people saw in Collier. We'll see how it works out for them. Personally, I would have gone in almost any other direction, but then again, I'm not a Super Bowl winning general manager, so what do I know? The Marquise Blair pick in the second round, again, I feel like it was decent value. Might have been a little bit early for me, but they feel like they kind of need to replenish depth in their secondary, so I can understand what they were going for. Again, he's a little bit off the wall as a pick there, so it's very Seahawks, but I don't hate that as much as the Collier pick. When you get into the mid rounds, I feel like is where they started getting a little bit better values. Gary Jennings, I graded as a late 3. They got him in the 4th. I really like that pick. Again, just kind of replenishing that receiving core, especially if Doug Baldwin, his injury ends up being a career ender, which was mentioned the night of the draft, shortly after they took DK. Not only do I think DK is going to be a huge home run pick for them, but Jennings, I think, can evolve into a wide receiver 3 for them at some point. So I was a big fan of that pick. Haynes, again, I had him graded as like a mid 4, and he went in the 22nd pick in the 4th round. So that was appropriate value for him for some guard depth, because you can never really have enough offensive line depth. The day 3 pick, though, that I think I like the most out of them, and it just seemed very Seahawk, was Ben Burkervin in the 5th round from Washington. They love their athletes in the linebacking core. They love having fast, twitchy, rangy linebackers that they can throw into coverage, that can run sideline to sideline, that have really good instincts. This linebacking core has been one of the strengths of the Seattle defense for as long as I can remember. With KJ Wright and Bobby Wagner. They even made Barkevious Mingo into a contributing player over there. They kind of switched his role and switched his position and turned him into a decent contributor, which I never thought I would say, but here we are. They got Shaquem Griffin a couple years ago, who, again, same kind of thing, just fast, explosive athlete. Michael Kendricks is still there. I'm not really sure what's going on with his legal issue or if he's going to be playing, but he's on the roster at the moment. So he's better than your average backup linebacker. But Burkervin specifically, I think, has a chance to not only make the roster, but straight up beat out all the other outside linebackers they have to take Mingo's spot. I think he can bring an immediate impact in coverage against the run as a blitzer. He's honestly more versatile than Mingo, in my opinion. And if you're getting a starting outside linebacker in the 5th round who has a whole lot of upside, that's a pretty good value to me. I loved that pick for them. And by the way, one round later, speaking of day 3 values, Travis Homer, watch out for him. I think he is legitimately going to compete for the 3rd down back role for them in 2019. He's excellent in pass protection. He's an explosive athlete in space. Not a great inside runner, but on 3rd down, if you can at least be a threatening receiving presence and also a good pass protector, you're going to make the team. And you're going to see significant snaps. So I love that value to get Homer, not just in the 6th, but in the late 6th, like very late 6th. I think that was a great pick. They're kind of overflowing with running backs at the moment, but in terms of just kind of finding a defined role, I think he is going to make the team. So just kind of looking at this class overall, I feel like they reached a little bit on their 1st round pick. They reached a little bit on their 2nd round pick. It's a very Seattle type of move to make, where we have our guys, we have our system fits, and screw everybody else who disagrees with us. But the fact that they did then come back and get DK Metcalf late in the 2nd round with the 32nd pick in the 2nd round, that was what really made this class to me. Like, I love the day 3 guys they got with Amadi and Burkiven and Homer and, even DeMarcus Christmas. I think he's going to be a decent value as a rotational defensive tackle for them. Even taking into account all those day 3 guys they got, DK Metcalf is really the centerpiece of this class. To get him, who I think was the best receiver, not even close, in this whole draft class, get him late in the 2nd after, 5 or 6 other receivers had been drafted, tremendous value. I think he's going to far exceed where he was drafted. I think he's going to be an immediate impact player. When you look at how that offense is structured, it's a lot of running the ball and then taking deep shots off play action. So when you combine the speed of DK Metcalf with the speed of Tyler Lockett and Russell Wilson having arguably the best deep ball in the league, and he's coming off play action and he's got 7 seconds of time while he's running around and trying to set up a deep ball, this offense is going to be explosive. Absolutely explosive. It's going to crush you to death with the run game. Don't get me wrong. Like, there are going to be games where it's just kind of a slow, methodical, crush the life out of you kind of offense. But when they're taking a shot, oh, believe me, they've got the firepower to do it. Between Metcalf and Lockett and even Baldwin, if he ever ends up coming back. I don't know if he will. And also they got the West Virginia kid, Jennings, now too. That trio, assuming Baldwin doesn't come back, that trio of Metcalf, Lockett, and Jennings, I like that a lot. That's not even factoring in Jerron Brown either. I think Amara Darboh is still on the roster, who they drafted him a couple years ago. But really, the trio that I'm looking forward to the most is Metcalf, Lockett, and Jennings. I think that's a really, really solid wide receiver core. So overall, it's a little bit of a mixed bag for Seattle. I disagreed on their early picks, but I feel like they nailed the mid-rounders and the late-rounders. And I feel like, if anything, they just enhanced their identity as a run the ball, throw it deep off play action kind of team. They stuck true to what they do, and they improved what they do. So in the end, good job by them. I'm all for it. Moving on now to the 49ers, who at second overall had probably the least surprising, I guess other than Kyler Murray, the least surprising first round pick in the whole draft with Nick Bosa. I've kind of made my thoughts known on Bosa before, but the short version is he's basically just Joey. So if you're comfortable taking Joey Bosa second overall, which I know a lot of people are, cool. You just basically got a clone of Joey Bosa. Personally, I would have taken Quinnen Williams and then figured out some sort of trade scenario for all of my other defensive tackles, other than Buckner, obviously. Buckner I'm keeping forever, but I feel like Quinnen was a better player. Not that Bosa's a bad player. Bosa's a great player. He's going to be a franchise pass rusher for a long time. But I do feel like they passed up a better player because of what they already had on the roster, which to me just screams of, passing on Michael Jordan because you already have Clyde Drexler. When you have a generational talent like Quinnen Williams on the board, I don't personally think, other than quarterback, there is a legitimate reason to pass on him. And again, that's not a knock on Bosa. I think Bosa's a great player. I think, they needed an edge rusher. I feel like when you have the second overall pick, you got to take the best player. It's really more of a philosophical difference than anything, but it's a philosophical difference I'm going to take to my grave, because that's just how I believe in building a team. Again, in a vacuum, taking Nick Bosa second overall is not a bad thing. He was the second best player in this class. I just think the first best player was still there. Whatever. Not a huge deal. In the second round, though, I feel like they had a really, really good pick in Deebo Samuel. The one reason why I might disagree with it is because I had DK Metcalf valued higher. Same kind of thing I said with the Baltimore Ravens yesterday, where, again, the best receiver on the board was not taken, but at the same time, it was still a good value for Deebo in a vacuum. I still think he was a late 1, early 2 kind of prospect, so they got him at a good value in the early 2, because he very easily could have gone late 1. Is he DK Metcalf? No, but it's not like they reached on him, so it's not the worst thing in the world. The only way I can really knock them for it is by saying, you didn't take DK. But considering that they still got a really good receiver at a position of need, in my opinion, it's not the worst thing in the world. The Jalen Hurd pick early in the third was very intriguing. Very intriguing, because he's got a lot of positional flexibility. Remember, he was a highly thought of running back at Tennessee before he transferred, converted to wide receiver. So I'm not entirely sure how they're going to use him. Some people have speculated you convert him to like a move tight end, and you give him some carries, you give him some catches, you get him involved in the screen game. I'm not sure what they're going to do with him. I think right now it's, we have this big athlete, and we're going to put him on the field and see what works. And if anyone can figure that out, it's probably Kyle Shanahan. So I'm okay with that pick solely because I believe in Kyle Shanahan as a play caller and play designer, and I think he's going to get the most out of Hurd. And if they do get the most out of Hurd, he's going to be a really tremendous weapon because he's a fantastic athlete. Again, not sure how they're going to use him, but I trust the coaching staff on this one. I'm a pretty big fan of that pick. They also got a punter in the fourth round, which was a really sneaky need for them. Maybe could have waited longer to get a punter, but if you feel like the best one is on the board, and considering how important punters are in terms of establishing field position, which can have, an overall massive impact on the game if you can control field position, I can understand why they did that. There's probably better values there, but at the same time, special teams is a very important component of the game, so I can't hate it too much. The rest of their day 3 haul, Greenlaw, Smith, Harris, all those guys, I feel like they got proper value for them. Greenlaw maybe went a little bit earlier than I thought he would. I had him graded as a late 5, early 6, but we're talking about a difference of like 15 picks here on day 3. It's not that big of a deal. All the guys in that kind of range are really smashed together. It's dealer's choice. So I think that's a pretty decent value for them. Probably going to be an immediate special teams contributor. Really, this whole kind of day 3, when you factor in the punter, was it was all special teams and then a developmental tackle from Vanderbilt. But everything else is, we need to improve our coverage team. We need to improve our kickoff team. We need to improve our blocking. We need to improve our tackling. We need new gunners. I think overall, that was a really solid draft for them because they got an intriguing piece on offense in Jalen Hurd that can line up in multiple spots. They got special teams help on all 4 core special teams. They got a developmental tackle. They got a really good wide receiver prospect in Deebo Samuel. And they got the best edge rusher in the draft in Nick Bosa. So just a solid class. I might disagree here and there on a couple of their valuations with players, but in terms of filling, positions of need, I can understand why they did that. So overall, I'm perfectly okay with what they did. Just some mild disagreements here and there, but not a big deal. Moving on now to our final team, the Cardinals, who had the first overall pick, in addition to being our last overall team that we're reviewing. It kind of the same thing that I was talking about with the 49ers. I would have taken Quinnen Williams first overall. I love Kyler Murray. I think he's a dynamic quarterback prospect. I think he's one of the best quarterback prospects of the last 3 years. And I understand the merit of, we have a new head coach. He wants his guys. He wants to run his system, how he wants to run his system, so we better get his guys. I get that. But at the same time, I feel like Josh Rosen could have run Cliff's system just fine. I did a whole episode on that exact topic, literally showing how his system works, the history of it, the different concepts, the mentality behind the system, and I truly feel like Josh Rosen could have been perfectly okay running it. Does he have the same dynamic mobility? Does he require a little bit more investment in the offensive line to ensure his survival? Yeah, he's not as good of a quarterback as Kyler Murray, at least not as good of a quarterback prospect. I agree with that. But to me, the drop-off between Kyler and Rosen is not as important as the drop-off between Quinnen Williams and literally every other player. Like Williams to me is a franchise-changing player. He is a Hall of Fame caliber talent. I don't care if you feel like that's too early to say. I felt the same thing about Saquon Barkley. I compared him to LaDainian Tomlinson for a reason because I felt like he was going to be a Hall of Fame talent, and I feel the exact same way about Quinnen Williams. You don't pass on Hall of Fame talents unless you really have a good reason, and I don't feel like the Cardinals had a good reason. I feel like they already had a quarterback. I feel like they could have made this offense work, and they passed on, to me, the clear-cut best player in the draft for nothing. This offense is going to be dynamic. It's going to be exciting. I like Kyler's fit in Arizona. I just also like Josh's fit. And I feel like they kind of jumped the gun on this, and they didn't give Rosen a proper chance. It's, maybe I'm going to be wrong in a few years, and Kyler's going to be an MVP candidate like Pat Mahomes, another Cliff Kingsbury product, and Josh is going to wallow in obscurity in Miami. That's very possible. It's very possible that could be reality and that they made the right move. But I wouldn't be myself if I didn't express all the reservations in the world about that line of thinking. I truly feel like they made, I don't want to say a mistake, because again, I feel like they got a good quarterback. I feel like they just kind of misjudged the roster building aspect of the draft and the team building aspect and the balancing act between offense and defense. I feel like there was just a huge miscalculation here. And when you also throw in how they completely mishandled the trade situation, how they really didn't get nearly as much value for Josh as they should have. I mean, this is a quarterback who's still got 4 years left on his rookie deal. If you count the 5th year option, he's dirt cheap because they paid him a whole lot of money in year one. You probably could have got a late first round pick, early second round pick out of that if you started the bidding war a long ass time ago. It sounds like they didn't do that. It sounds like they were really playing it close to the vest for whatever reason. Like, even if you're not, shopping him, you at least kind of want to see what the offers are and start kind of pitting people against each other. They could have gotten a lot more for Josh, which then translates into even more assets that they could have used to help Kyler. So this whole situation from top to bottom, in terms of picking a player that I feel like they didn't actually need, to not handling the trade correctly of the player that I think they could have done just fine with, the whole thing is just, it's annoying to me. Again, it's not a wrong decision. It's just one that I highly, highly disagree with, if I can put it that way. But, that being said, the rest of their class after Kyler, I feel was really, really spectacular. Getting Byron Murphy, who probably could have been a top 15 to 16 pick, getting him in the first pick in the second round, incredible value. He was the best corner in this class, and to get him that late is almost unheard of, to be honest, when you consider the positional importance of a corner. Andy Isabella, a true deep threat, which they needed more than almost anything else to make this air raid system work, because it's just shots on shots on shots. When you get one-on-one outside, you need receivers who can take that one-on-one and capitalize on it by just roasting it. And Isabella can do that. He's a legit low 4.3 kind of receiver. The hands are a little bit inconsistent. It kind of reminds me of Will Fuller in that way, but just factoring in his raw speed and what he can bring to this offense in a vertical dimension, I'm very much in favor of it. And by the way, the Hakeem Butler pick early in the fourth round, I thought he should have been a late one, early two, which makes this receiving core even more dangerous because they got a tremendous value with him as like their big 6'5", go up and get it kind of receiver. Kyler had the best fade in all of college football last year. And when you pair that kind of fade and ball placement with that big of a receiver, with that kind of length and catch radius, as inconsistent as his hands may be, that's going to be a touchdown waiting to happen. I loved that value for them. So between, Murray and Isabella and Butler, we've got a pretty good, young core of weapons here. Not to mention the Keyshawn Johnson pick early in the sixth round, also a pretty decent value for them. I had him graded as a fifth. They got him early sixth. So this whole wide receiving core is kind of getting remade before our eyes. All they had before was essentially just Christian Kirk and a very old Larry Fitzgerald. Now they got a whole bunch of youth there. If you include Kirk, he's only in his first 2 years, but a whole lot of young weapons that are going to help out Kyler, and I really, really like what they're putting together. In terms of protection, obviously they can still use help. They didn't take an offensive lineman until the sixth round, but they did get Lamont Gaillard out of Georgia, who I think was one of the better interior offensive linemen in this class. He probably went 2 rounds later than I thought he would. One of the best centers, just very, very sturdy in pass protection. He's smart. He understands protections. He understands fronts. I think he can very easily be a starter for them, either at center or at either guard spot. He's got a lot of positional flexibility for them. I really, really like that pick. Let's see, who else did they get? Oh, Zach Allen. I totally skipped over him. They got him early in the third. I mocked him as a first round pick to the Chargers, I believe. He's a little bit of a tweener. He's not quite, light enough to be a 4-3 end. He's not quite, or I guess it would be an edge rusher since they're switching back to a 3-4. He's not quite heavy enough to be a 5-tech, so they're probably going to have to put on 10 or 15 pounds into his frame to convert him into a 5-tech to kind of, make him fit a little bit better in this defense. But I do think he's got the frame to carry that weight and carry it in a healthy way. He's got extremely long arms. He's very strong. He's got a really sturdy anchor. So I think you can use him as a slightly undersized 5 technique at like 290, 295 pounds. And just have him use that length and power. And also, he's also a really quick pass rusher as well. He, maybe not as explosive as some other guys because he's just so damn thick and big, but in terms of 5 techniques, he's going to be quicker than most 5 techniques. So he's got some versatility both as a run defender and as a pass rusher, so that's a really good value for them. Of course, assuming he remakes his body to kind of fit the scheme a little bit better, but I really like that pick. Deontay Thompson in the 5th round. I don't know anybody who had him going all the way in the 5th, but there must be some sort of medical thing that I'm not aware of, because I don't know any other reason why he would slip that far. Really, really solid safety out of Alabama. Incredible instincts. He's got ball skills. Not as athletically gifted as some other Bama safeties in the past, but he's really, really smart, and I love his instincts. I think he's going to be an immediate contributor for them. Potentially as like a nickel safety or a dime safety. I'm not entirely sure how their nickel and dime packages are going to be structured, but I think he can probably see the field fairly early because of his intelligence and because of his ball skills. Who else they got? Oh, man, they had a whole lot of picks this year. I'm just kind of looking at their list right now. That Caleb Wilson pick in the 7th, that was their last pick. He was another intriguing tight end. I think I had him as like my 12th tight end, if I remember correctly. I don't know how many went ahead of him. I definitely had a draftable grade, and so to get him in the 40th pick of the 7th round, he doesn't even have to make the team, but I feel like his athleticism at the very least is worth a camp invite. This is not an offensive system that has made use of the tight end much before, but when you consider that he's 6'4", 240, and he runs a 4.56, like that's a really good athlete. So I think, again, even though tight end isn't really a thing in Cliff Kingsbury's offense, I don't think he used it at all at Texas Tech. The fact that he has essentially receiver traits, you can use him as kind of a big slot, post up on smaller safeties, outrun slower linebackers kind of guy. Really more of a matchup weapon than anything. And it's a 7th round pick. He's worth a gamble because of that athleticism. You get him into camp, you get him into preseason, see what he can do. If he makes the team, he makes the team. If he doesn't, he doesn't. No skin off my nose. Again, it's the 40th pick in the 7th round. It's not that big of a deal, but in terms of lottery tickets, I like that value a lot. He's a really, really athletic young tight end. So on the whole, if I just kind of look at their class and ignore my fundamental disagreement with how they handled their quarterback situation, and I just kind of look at their picks individually in a vacuum, it's a really, really good draft. Kyler Murray is a great quarterback prospect. Byron Murphy is a great corner to get in the 2nd round. You got Isabella, Butler, and Keyshawn Johnson as your young wide receivers that you're bringing in to develop. At the very least, I really love the value on 2 of them. Zach Allen, I think, can be a really sneaky good 5 technique if he puts on weight. Deontay Thompson is an instinctual safety. You got center help. You got tackle help. At least a developmental tackle help in Joshua Miles. You got a really athletic young tight end that you can kind of try to fit into your system as a big slot. Like there's so many value picks here and so many good players that even with my disagreement on number 1 overall, this is a really, really good class. So I can't really knock it that much, because when I look at the big picture, the Cardinals got a lot better for 2019. I don't know how well they're going to do in the division, because the NFC West is a slaughterhouse. The Rams are still amazing. The Seahawks are still great. The 49ers, now that they're getting Garoppolo back, like they're as dangerous as anybody. So the Cardinals, they're in a really hard division, but they're a much better team than they were 1 year ago today. They've got a better coach, in my opinion. They've got a better offensive system. They've got a lot more talent. Like, this is not a bad team. This is a team that is going to look so far removed from what they were last year. By mid-October, you guys are going to be shocked. So overall, this is in a vacuum, this is one of the better draft classes in the league. And if there was any team that I feel like really made use of having a terrible season, it was the Arizona Cardinals. So, but anyway, that'll wrap it up for this year's 4-part draft recap and review. I hope you guys had a lot of fun going through every single team and every single pick with me, division by division, day by day. This was a pretty sizable undertaking, as evidenced by the fact that I am damn near going to lose my voice if I keep talking for another 5 minutes. So I'm going to wrap up this recording session as quickly as I can. Thank you to everyone for watching all 4 of these. I really enjoyed this draft season. I enjoy every draft season, but this one was really especially fun. You guys made it so entertaining. The comments were great. The questions were great. The support has been awesome. I do want to let you guys know, I'll make another video on this later, but I do want to let you guys know that because of your support, all the patrons, all the brand deals I've been able to do to kind of raise money for the channel and kind of support everything, all of your guys' incredible support has helped me to buy a house this summer, and I'm going to be using that house to build out a studio and make even more content and hopefully come out with a podcast that's both going to be audio and visual. I'm going to be putting out more episodes because it's going to be a little bit easier for me to record in a studio than in my crappy one-bedroom apartment that's off a main street where you can hear the semis and sirens going every 5 seconds. So your support has not only helped me turn this into a career, but it's helping me to make more content than ever starting this summer once I get into that house and build out a studio. And I truly could not be more grateful. You guys are incredible. I can't possibly thank you in the ways you deserve. So I'm going to do whatever I can to thank you by making content, because as long as I can do that, I feel like I can maybe make all this worth your while. So again, thank you everybody for sticking with me. Thank you for making this draft season fun. And I'll be back soon with more traditional Film Room episodes on a whole bunch of really, really cool topics. I hope you guys enjoy those when those come out. And until then, later.